Hi, Susan Clare here from GourmetQuilter. I thought I'd talk today a little bit about the idea of perhaps doing some applique after a quilt is already quilted. Now there's a whole different concept. For some of us, you perhaps already do it. I like to do a lot of fusible applique and that works really well. Sometimes when I'm doing applique and quilting, I don't always want to keep stopping and starting for the applique, so I might do the whole lot of quilting first and then I might put the applique on afterwards. And I can hear some of you saying, oh but, let's have a little look. So here I've got a small quilt that is already quilted. It's just some straight lines going up and down the quilt. And I wanted to put this applique in the middle, so I'd left the area ready to take the applique, but rather than having to stop and start at the applique all the time, it is fused on, so I've fused it on over the top of all the quilted area, and I'm going to stitch around my applique now. So I'm just doing free motion raw edge stitching, but it could be any type of applique. It doesn't have to be this particular type of applique. Because it's machine applique, the stitching will definitely go through, but this is quite a fun way of jazzing up a quilt, or perhaps getting, as I said, some quilting done so that it's uninterrupted beforehand, and then putting the applique on afterwards. So I'm just going to start the applique. I'm going to do just one of the ears so that I can just show you how much it is so much fun to do. So I'm just going to come around here. So I'm just using a free motion straight stitch, and I've got a light coloured thread underneath and a darker thread for on top. Just going to do this ear. So I think as long as you're matching your threads, particularly underneath, so that it doesn't jump at you too much on the back of your quilt, because I can see that would not always be a good thing. So I've done the ear. Now I would possibly continue on and do a little bit more, but I just thought I'd show you this much because I've got a nice light coloured thread in the bobbin, and yes, of course you're going to see the stitching because it's quilting through, so it forms a type of quilting in itself. But I think if you use a matching thread, it doesn't really jump at you too much. However, if you're not too sure about that, then I would strongly suggest that you would use perhaps a patterned fabric on the back, and then it really doesn't show you. And I'll show you this quilt that's hanging up behind me now. This one here was all pieced and all quilted before I did these applique dragonflies. So it's kind of fun to do something and then think, oh, I'd like a little bit of extra on there. And so on the back of this quilt here, as you can see, I've used a patterned fabric and I've used a thread that blends in really well with the backing. And here is my dragonfly, which I'm guessing you probably can't really see, sitting with the other quilting through it as well. So by using a backing that absorbs a lot of the stitching, that is another way of making it less obvious if you didn't want it to be obvious that you've done the work that way. So another thought would be of this whole concept of having something pre-quilted and then adding some applique is maybe, just maybe, you've made a quilt at some stage that was perhaps a little bit plain, and you always thought, oh, I just would have liked a little something on that quilt. Well, I have a fairly plain quilt here, and we could easily jazz this quilt up. I quite like it plain, however, it is very plain, and maybe we'd like to put a little something on it. So it might be dragonflies like I've got here, it might be birds, it might be spiders, who knows, it could be turtles. All sorts of things. So what I ended up doing was coming up with 3 different colours, and I just drew a super simple shape of a very basic flower with another super simple shape. So I've used 3 colours and I've cut all 3 shapes from the 3 fabrics, and I might just in a centre circle like that to make it kind of fun. And you could do something with just your 3 fabrics, and so again using up maybe some leftovers or something in contrast. I've tended to do blended colours here that sort of tone in with the quilt, but you might want something much brighter. You might have a nice light coloured sort of black and white type quilt and you put some strong colours on it or anything. And so you could easily put some applique, as I said, not necessarily the fusible applique that I like to do so much. You might like to do hand applique. It can go on afterwards, after the whole quilt is finished, possibly even already tested, because you just want to jazz up a quilt. Or maybe, just maybe, something's happened to the quilt and you might have a little mark on a quilt. Now that does happen. You could cover it up and make it look super artistic with maybe something like an applique like that. And then another idea I had where you might want to do some applique on top of some quilted fabric is perhaps you've been practicing some quilting and you might have a piece of quilted fabric that's just practice. So you've got all sorts of random things going on in there and you think, oh, it'd be a shame not to just use that for something. Well, let's put a little flower or two on it. Same sort of thing, or maybe a bird, or maybe a spider, or maybe something quite different. Boats. Now boats would be nice. So the same sort of thing you could apply onto here. You might want to make a bag out of this piece of test run quilting, and you just might want something on it to just liven it up. And just because it's quilted doesn't mean it can't already have some applique on top. So that was really just a thought where you might want to have something that's already pieced and quilted, and then you think, oh, I'd just like to add a little something, and it's not too late. In fact, a lot of the applique that I really enjoy doing is done that way because I like the fusible applique, but it would work just as well if you prefer different types of applique. So that was just an idea for being able to jazz something up that you already have, or starting a whole new project and quilting it first and then doing some applique on top. So that was it for this time. Thank you.